You must marry her, or she will die.
The woman Caleb rescued from the blaze was an anomaly, an impossibility. She shouldn't have been there, not in that state. Towering at nearly 7 feet, her robust build dwarfed grown men, making them appear like mere children. Yet, within her eyes resided a terror he had never witnessed in one so formidable. When he inquired about her name, she remained silent. When he asked about her origins, she turned away, evading the question. But when the old Apache man arrived at his ranch the next morning, Caleb came to understand that the rescue was the easy part. The real challenge was yet to come. The fire erupted shortly after sunset. Caleb noticed the smoke rising from a valley near the edge of Apache territory, a place he had learned to avoid during his 15 years of solitary ranching. Something about the way the flames leaped and danced compelled him to saddle his horse without a second thought. He tried to convince himself it was mere habit, the instinct of a man who had witnessed too much death to ignore its ominous presence. The cabin was small, barely standing even before the fire began its assault. Through the collapsed doorway, he could see movement, someone trapped beneath a fallen beam. Caleb didn't hesitate. He never did when it came to situations like this. The intense heat seared his face as he pushed his way inside, his eyes stinging from the smoke that filled his lungs like a deadly poison. What he discovered inside stopped him in his tracks. The person pinned beneath the beam wasn't struggling, thrashing, or fighting like most people would. She lay perfectly still, observing the flames creep closer with a resignation that bordered on acceptance. But it was her sheer size that made Caleb's breath catch in his throat. She was massive, not overweight, but powerfully built with strength that seemed sculpted from solid rock. Her arms, although trapped, revealed muscles that could likely snap a man's neck without breaking a sweat. For a fleeting moment, Caleb wondered if he had stumbled into something beyond his understanding, something he shouldn't interfere with. Then she looked at him. Her eyes were dark, as deep and mysterious as canyon shadows. And within them, he saw something that sealed his decision. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of living. That look, that particular brand of resignation, was one he recognized all too well. He'd seen it reflected in his own eyes for years. Caleb grabbed the beam. It wouldn't budge. The woman's eyes widened slightly, the first sign of real emotion she had displayed. But she remained silent. She simply watched him struggle with something that would take 3 ordinary men to lift. He repositioned his grip, planted his feet firmly, and pulled with every ounce of strength he possessed. The wood groaned and creaked. His shoulders screamed in protest. Then something deep within him, something that had been dormant for a long time, roared back to life. The beam shifted inches, then a foot. The woman rolled free just as the roof began to collapse. Caleb didn't remember how they got outside. One moment they were trapped inside the inferno. The next they were on the ground 30 feet away, both gasping for air that didn't burn. The cabin imploded upon itself with a sound like breaking bones. She sat up slowly, deliberately, and for the first time, Caleb got a true sense of her immense size. She was extraordinary. Her height, her physique, everything about her seemed designed to inspire awe or fear. Probably both. Definitely both. He extended his hand to help her to her feet. She stared at it as if he'd offered her a loaded weapon. That's when Caleb noticed her hands. They were covered in old scars, dozens of them, crisscrossing her palms and fingers like a roadmap of violence. These weren't the scars of accidents or work. These were deliberate, methodical. She didn't take his hand. She rose on her own, unsteady, but refusing any assistance. And when she finally stood to her full height, Caleb had to tilt his head back to meet her gaze. She studied him for a long moment. Then, without a word, she turned and walked into darkness, disappearing between the trees like smoke. Caleb stood there, watching the cabin burn down to nothing, wondering what it just saved, and more importantly, from what. He didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, that look of resignation, those scarred hands, the way she'd rather die than accept help from a stranger. When the sun rose and he heard the sound of horses approaching his ranch, Caleb already knew his life was about to change. He just didn't know how unbelievably impossible the change would be. The old Apache man who dismounted wore authority, like other men wore coats. 3 younger men flanked him, their faces carefully neutral, but their hands never straying far from their weapons. The old man's eyes found Caleb immediately, reading him the way a hawk scans the ground before diving. He spoke in English, his accent thick, but his words precise. "You saved my daughter last night." Not a question, a statement. Caleb nodded slowly. The old man's expression didn't change. "Then you must marry her." Caleb's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. The morning sun cast long shadows across his porch, but suddenly everything felt cold. The old Apache man stood perfectly still, waiting for a response to words that made no sense. Behind him, The three younger men shifted their weight, their hands resting near their weapons with practiced casualness. Marry her. Just like that. As if saving someone from a fire automatically created a debt that could only be paid with a lifetime commitment. Caleb set the cup down carefully, buy himself a few seconds to think. His mind raced through possible responses, each one dying before it reached his mouth. This wasn't a request he could laugh off or politely decline. The old man's eyes held the weight of something far more serious than gratitude. I don't understand, Caleb finally said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. The old man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My name is Grant. The woman you saved is Grace, my daughter, my only child. He paused, and something flickered across his face. Pain perhaps, or shame. Among my people, a life debt must be honored, but there is more than tradition at stake here. Caleb waited, his rancher's instincts telling him to stay silent and let the other man reveal what he needed to say. Grant's next words came slower, heavier. Grace cannot return to our village. She will be harmed if she does, perhaps killed. He said it without emotion, stating a fact as simple as the color of the sky. You are the only man who has shown her kindness without fear. You risked your life when you had nothing to gain. This makes you worthy. The logic was insane. Caleb had pulled a stranger from a burning building, something any decent person would do. Now he was being told his reward for basic humanity was to upend his entire existence. Worthy of what exactly? Caleb asked, though he already knew the answer would only make things worse. Of protecting her, of giving her a place where she can exist without persecution. Grant took a step closer, and despite his age, there was nothing frail about the movement. I am asking you to give my daughter what I cannot. Safety. The word hung between them like smoke. Safety. Such a simple thing to ask for. Such an impossible thing to provide. Caleb thought of his 15 years of solitude, of the careful life he'd built on the edges of civilization, where no one asked questions, and he owed nothing to anyone. He thought of the woman from last night, her massive frame, her scarred hands, the way she'd looked at him like he was another threat instead of her salvation. Why me? Caleb asked. Why not one of your own people? Grant's expression hardened. Because my own people are the danger. The statement landed like a physical blow. Caleb had heard stories of tribal conflicts, of people cast out for breaking sacred laws or challenging tradition. But this felt different, more personal, more desperate. What did she do? The question came out before Caleb could stop it. She was born, Grant said simply. Everything else followed from that. One of the younger men behind Grant shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the tree line, as if expecting trouble. Grant noticed a movement, and his voice took on an edge of urgency. I am not asking you to love her. I am not asking you to want this. I am asking you to honor the life debt and keep her alive. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch, setting it on the porch railing. This is all I can offer in return. But know this, if you refuse, I will understand, and Grace will be dead within the week. Caleb stared at the pouch, his mind reeling. Grant had just handed him an impossible choice wrapped in a death sentence. Refuse and a woman dies because he chose his comfortable solitude. Accept and tie himself forever to someone he didn't know, didn't understand, and frankly wasn't sure he wanted to understand. I need time to think, Caleb said. Grant nodded slowly. You have until sunset. After that, we must move her regardless of her answer. He turned to leave, then paused. She is at the creek, beyond your eastern pasture. She refused to come closer to your home. I suggest you speak with her before you decide. The four men mounted their horses and rode off, leaving Caleb alone on his porch with a leather pouch and a decision that would define the rest of his life. He didn't open the pouch. He already knew no amount of money or goods could balance this equation. Instead, he stood there as the sun climbed higher, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. Yesterday, he'd saved a life. Today, that same act might cost him his freedom. The creek was a 20-minute walk through tall grass that hadn't been cut in years. Caleb found himself moving toward it before he consciously decided to go, as if his body understood something his mind hadn't caught up to yet. He needed to see her again, needed to understand what Grant was really asking him to protect. What he found at the creek would change everything he thought he knew about impossible choices. She sat on a flat rock near the water's edge, her back to him, but Caleb knew she'd heard him approach. Her posture had shifted, her shoulders tensing, her head tilting slightly to track his footsteps through the grass. She didn't turn around. In daylight, away from fire and smoke, Grace looked even more imposing. Her height wasn't the result of illness or deformity. It was simply who she was, built on a scale that nature rarely attempted. Her dark hair hung past her shoulders, and even sitting, she matched Caleb's standing height. He stopped 10 feet away, giving her space. Your father came to my ranch this morning. No response. She continued staring at the creek as if he hadn't spoken. Caleb tried again. He said, "You can't go home." He said, "They'll hurt you." This time, her shoulders moved, a small shrug that somehow conveyed volumes of resignation. When she finally spoke, her voice was deeper than most women's, but clear and steady. "You should have let me burn." The words hit Caleb harder than he expected. He'd heard despair before, recognized in the mirror often enough, but this was different. This was someone who'd moved past despair into acceptance of their own worthlessness. "I don't believe that," Caleb said. She turned then, those dark eyes finding his with an intensity that made him want to step back. "You don't know anything about me, about what I am. I know you didn't start that fire yourself. Someone said it. Someone wanted you dead." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, that he figured it out so quickly. Does it matter? One way or another, I was always going to end this way. Caleb moved closer slowly, the way he'd approach a wounded animal. "Your father asked me to marry you, to keep you safe." Grace laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that held no humor. "Of course he did. The great Grant trying to solve his embarrassment by giving me to the first white man who showed basic decency." She stood abruptly, rising to her full height, and Caleb had to crane his neck to maintain eye contact. "Do you know what I am to my people? A curse, a punishment from the spirits for some crime my mother must have committed." "That's not true." She cut him off. "I was born too large, too strong, too different. When I was young, they tried to fix me. Medicine men, shamans, healers who promised they could make me normal." She held up her scarred hands. "These are from the ceremonies, the bindings, the attempts to stop my bones from growing wrong." Caleb stared at those scars with new understanding. Someone had deliberately hurt this woman repeatedly, trying to change something that couldn't be changed. When nothing worked, Nish continued, her voice flat, "They decided I was possessed, dangerous, something that needed to be isolated before I corrupted others." She took a step toward him. And despite everything, Caleb's instincts screamed at him to retreat. "So they built me that cabin, sent food once a week, pretended I didn't exist. And I let them because at least isolation was better than their ceremonies, until someone decided isolation was enough." "Someone set the fire," Caleb said quietly. She nodded. "3 nights ago, I heard them outside my cabin. Young warriors arguing about whether killing me would bring honor or shame to the tribe." Her jaw tightened. "They compromised, set the fire, and left. If I died, it was the spirit's will. If I survived, perhaps the flames would purify me." The casual cruelty of it made Caleb's stomach turn. These weren't enemies or strangers. These were her own people, her own community, deciding her life was worth less than their superstitions. "Your father is trying to protect you," Caleb said. "My father is trying to save face," Nish corrected. "He's a leader. He can't openly defy the tribe's judgment without losing his authority. But he also can't let his daughter be murdered without trying something." She looked at Caleb with eyes that had seen too much rejection. "So, we found you, a white rancher with no ties to our world, someone who could take me off his hands and ease his conscience." Caleb wanted to argue, but he couldn't. He didn't know Grant well enough to judge the man's motivations. All he knew was that right now, in this moment, the woman in front of him needed help, whether she wanted to admit it or not. "What do you want?" he asked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked, confusion crossing her face, as if no one had ever asked her that before. "I want," she started, then stopped, tried again. "I don't know. I've spent so long trying to survive that I forgot there might be other options." Before Caleb could respond, the sound of horses cut through the morning air, multiple riders moving fast, coming from the direction of Apache territory. Naylish's entire body went rigid. "They found me faster than I thought." "Who?" Caleb asked, though dread was already pooling in his gut. She looked at him with something close to pity. "The ones who want to finish what the fire started." 5 riders emerged from the tree line, moving with the confidence of men who knew they outnumbered their target. They weren't dressed for ceremony or diplomacy. These were hunters, and Grace was their prey. Caleb stepped between her and the approaching horses, his hand instinctively moving to his hip, though he wore no weapon. It was a stupid, reflexive gesture that wouldn't stop anything, but his body moved before his mind could talk him out of it. The lead rider pulled his horse to a stop 20 feet away. He was young, maybe 25, with a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't twisted with disgust. His eyes locked onto Naylish with a kind of hatred that came from deep conviction. "Step aside, white man," he said in heavily accented English. "This is not your concern." "She's on my land," Caleb replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "That makes it my concern." The young warrior's jaw tightened. He said something in his own language, sharp and dismissive. Behind Caleb, Nish translated quietly. He says I poisoned his brother, made him sick with my presence. Did you? Caleb asked, not taking his eyes off the riders. I've never spoken to his brother, never been near him. Her voice held exhaustion, as if she had defended herself from these accusations too many times. But his brother caught fever last winter. Someone had to be blamed. The lead warrior spoke again, this time directing his words at Grace. His tone carried the weight of judgment, of righteousness. She didn't translate, but Caleb could hear the venom in every syllable. Leave, Caleb said, cutting through the warrior's speech. Now, the young man's eyes narrowed. You would protect a demon? You would stand against us for something that should have died years ago. Something in Caleb's chest went cold and hard. He'd heard that tone before, the absolute certainty that another human being was less than human. He'd heard it from men who justified every cruelty, every injustice by simply deciding their victim wasn't worth basic decency. I'm standing against 5 men who rode onto my property to threaten a woman, Caleb said. Now get off my land before I make you. It was an empty threat, and everyone knew it. 5 armed warriors against 1 unarmed rancher. The math was brutal and simple. The lead warrior smiled, recognizing Caleb's bluff. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, making a show of his authority. The other 4 followed suit, fanning out in a loose semicircle. You made a mistake, white man, the warrior said, drawing a long knife from his belt. Grant may have fooled you with his stories, but she is not worth dying for. Caleb's mind raced through possibilities. He was fast, but not fast enough to outrun 5 men. Strong, but not strong enough to fight them all. His ranch house was too far to reach, and even if he made it, his rifle was locked in a cabinet that would take precious seconds to open. He was out of options and out of time. Then Nailish moved. She didn't step forward aggressively or make any threatening gesture. She simply rose to her full height and let the warriors see her completely, all 7 feet of her, every inch of muscle and bone that made her different, that made her terrifying. The effect was immediate. The warriors stopped advancing. 2 of them actually took a step back. Grace spoke in her own language, her voice carrying across the creek with absolute authority. Caleb didn't understand the words, but he understood the message. She was challenging them directly, removing Caleb from the equation. The lead warrior's face went pale, then red with rage. He shouted something back, but his voice cracked slightly. Fear, Caleb realized. These men were afraid of her. What did you say? Caleb asked quietly. I told them if they want to kill me, they should try, Grace replied. But I won't go quietly. I won't burn or run, or make it easy. She took a step forward, and the warriors retreated another step. I told them whoever comes for me should make peace with their families first, because they won't be going home. It was a bluff. It had to be. But watching the warriors' faces, Caleb wasn't entirely sure. There was something in Nisha's stance, in the way she carried herself, that suggested she meant every word. The lead warrior was caught between his hatred and his fear. Caleb could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Was killing this woman worth risking his own life? Was his brother's fever worth becoming another body? The standoff stretched for seconds that felt like hours. Then hoof beats shattered the tension. Grant appeared from the north, riding hard with a dozen warriors behind him. He positioned himself between his daughter and the young warriors, his face a mask of controlled fury. The confrontation that followed was entirely in their language, but Caleb didn't need translation. Grant was exercising his authority as a leader, and the young warriors were being forced to back down. But the looks they shot at Nish before mounting their horses promised this wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the 5 riders disappeared into the trees, Grant turned to Caleb. You have until sunset to decide. After that, I cannot protect her, not even from my own people. He rode off without another word, leaving Caleb alone with Grace in a decision that had just become infinitely more complicated, because now he understood something crucial. This wasn't just about marriage or tradition or honor. This was about survival, and time was running out faster than anyone wanted to admit. Silence settled over the creek like dust after a storm. Nish sat back down on her rock, but her hands were shaking, small tremors that she tried to hide by gripping her knees. But Caleb saw them anyway. The woman who had just stared down 5 armed warriors was terrified. You weren't bluffing, Caleb said, sitting on a fallen log nearby. Were you? Nailish didn't answer immediately. She stared at her scarred palms as if reading something written there in old pain. 3 years ago, a man from the village decided to test whether I was truly cursed. He came to my cabin at night with a knife. Caleb waited, sensing the story needed to be told at its own pace. He thought because I was a woman, I would be easy to overpower. He was wrong. She looked up, meeting Caleb's eyes. I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted him to stop. But when some of my size fights back, even in defense, the results are permanent. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. The fear in the warrior's eyes, the way they retreated when she stood. This wasn't superstition or rumor. These men knew firsthand, or through stories, that Grace was dangerous when cornered. What happened after? Caleb asked. Grant covered it up, said the man fell from his horse and broke his neck. Most people believed it because the alternative was admitting one of their warriors had tried to attack a helpless woman and lost. Her voice hardened. But some knew the truth, and those who knew made sure everyone else understood that touching me meant risking death. Caleb processed this carefully. So they're afraid of you, but they still want you dead. Fear and hatred often walk together, Grace said quietly. They fear what I might do. They hate that I exist at all. The fire was their way of solving both problems without risking direct confrontation. A bird called from somewhere in the trees, its song incongruously cheerful against the weight of their conversation. Caleb watched the creek water flow past, thinking about choices and consequences. If I say no, he started, then paused, making sure he wanted to ask this question. If I refuse your father's proposal, where will you go? Nish considered the question for a long moment. There's a trading post 3 days north run by a French trapper who doesn't care much about local politics. I could try to work there, assuming he doesn't shoot me on sight for being Apache. And if he does, she shrugged, then I keep moving until I find somewhere that will tolerate me, or until I can't move anymore. The casual acceptance of her own probable death struck Caleb harder, more than it should have. This woman had been living under a death sentence her entire life. The fire, the warriors, the isolation, these were just the latest attempts in prolonged campaign to erase her existence. Why did you refuse to come near my ranch house? Caleb asked, changing the subject. Your father said you wouldn't get any closer. For the first time, something akin to embarrassment crossed N.A.L. Nish's face. Because I didn't want you to feel trapped, she explained. You saved my life. I didn't want you to wake up and find me on your property like some obligation you couldn't escape. The consideration in that gesture, the awareness of how her presence might affect him, revealed more about her character than anything else she'd said. Despite everything she'd endured, she still thought about other people's comfort before her own. Caleb stood, brushing dirt from his pants. Come back to the house. Grace looked up sharply. Why? Because if we're going to have this conversation, we should do it properly, he stated matter-of-factly. And because you haven't eaten since yesterday, and I'm not letting you starve on my land while I figure out what to do. She didn't move. I'm not asking you to save me again. I know, Caleb said. I'm not asking your permission. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or perhaps the first hint of hope. She stood slowly, and together they walked back through the tall grass toward his ranch house. They were halfway there when Caleb heard the sound that changed everything. A woman's scream, high and desperate, coming from the direction of his barn. He broke into a run, Grace keeping pace beside him despite her size. They rounded the corner of the house and stopped dead. A wagon had overturned near the barn entrance. A woman knelt beside it, trying desperately to lift one side. Underneath, barely visible, was a small child. Help, the woman shouted when she saw them. My son is trapped. Please, the wheel is crushing him. Caleb sprinted forward, his mind already calculating angles and leverage points. The wagon was heavy, built for hauling supplies, and the wheel had the child pinned at the chest. The boy wasn't moving. Caleb grabbed the wagon's frame and pulled, but it barely shifted. The woman was crying now, begging, her hands bleeding from trying to claw at the wooden wheel. It's too heavy. Caleb gasped, pulling harder. His muscles screamed, but the wagon wouldn't budge. The boy's face was turning blue. Then Nish was there. She positioned herself beside Caleb, wrapped her hands around the wagon's frame, and lifted. The wagon rose slowly at first, then steadily as if it weighed nothing at all. The woman dragged her son free, cradling him as he gasped for air. Grace held the wagon up until Caleb helped prop it with a beam. Then she stepped back, breathing hard but steady. The woman looked up at Nish, her face wet with tears and gratitude. Then her eyes widened as she truly saw who had saved her child. Her expression shifted from gratitude to recognition to something that looked horribly like fear. You're the giant, she whispered, pulling her son closer. The cursed one. And Caleb realized their decision had just been made for them in the worst possible way. The woman gathered her son and scrambled backward, putting distance between herself and Nailish as if proximity alone could cause harm. The boy was coughing, breathing again, alive because of the person his mother now looked at with naked terror. Thank you, the woman managed to say, but the words came out strangled, forced. Her eyes never left Grace, tracking her like a predator. Grace stood perfectly still, her face carefully blank. Caleb recognized that expression now. It was the same one she'd worn in the burning cabin. Resignation. The knowledge that no good deed would ever be enough to overcome what she was. Your son needs water, Caleb said, breaking the tension. And you should check for broken ribs. Come inside. The woman's eyes snapped to him, and he saw the calculation happening. Accept help from the man who harbored a demon, or refuse and risk her child's health. I can't, she whispered. I'm sorry. I can't. She climbed onto the overturned wagon seat, pulling her son onto her lap, and urged the remaining horse forward. The animal struggled against the unbalanced weight, but eventually, the wagon lurched away, leaving deep ruts in the dirt. Caleb watched them go, anger building in his chest. That boy was alive because of Nish. The mother knew it, and still, she fled as if staying would doom them both. This is why I stayed at the creek, Nish said quietly. She hadn't moved from where she'd set down the wagon. People see me, and all they can think about is what I might do, not what I actually did. Before Caleb could respond, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The woman's wagon was heading south, directly toward the nearest settlement, a cluster of homesteads and a small trading post about 6 miles away. She would talk. Of course she would. She'd tell everyone about the giant Apache woman staying at Caleb Tyler's ranch. She'd describe how Nish had lifted that wagon with impossible strength. And because fear made people stupid, they forget the part about saving a child and remember only that something unnatural lived nearby. We need to leave, Nalish said, reading his expression. Now, before that woman brings back half the territory. Where would you go? Caleb asked. She shook her head. Not we. Me? You've done more than enough. I won't let you lose your home because of my existence. The word choice struck him. Not because of me, but because of my existence, as if her mere presence in the world was a problem, not the fear and hatred of everyone around her. Caleb looked at his ranch house, at the land he'd carved from wilderness through 15 years of backbreaking work. He thought about the isolation he'd chosen, the walls he'd built to keep the world at a safe distance. He convinced himself that solitude was freedom, but watching Grace prepare to walk away into certain death, he realized he'd been lying to himself for years. Isolation wasn't freedom. It was just a different kind of prison. The sun's about halfway to setting, Caleb said, checking his position. Your father gave me until sunset to decide. He turned to face her fully. I'm deciding now. Nish's expression flickered, hope and fear warring across her features. Don't make this choice because you feel sorry for me. I'm not, Caleb said, and realized it was true. I'm making it because those warriors are going to come back, and when they do, they'll have numbers, and because that woman is spreading stories right now that will turn every homesteader within 50 miles into your enemy. He took a step closer. I'm making it because if I let you walk away, you'll be dead within 3 days, and I'll have to live knowing I could have stopped it. You don't owe me anything, she said, but her voice shook slightly. No, Caleb agreed, but maybe I owe myself something. Maybe I'm tired of watching people suffer, because it's easier than standing up. The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither fully understood yet. Nish studied him for a long moment. You understand what you're agreeing to? This isn't a temporary arrangement. Among my people, marriage is binding forever. There's no change in your mind in a year when you realize what a mistake this was. I understand, Caleb confirmed. You'll be tied to someone everyone fears. Your neighbors will avoid you. They'll whisper. Some might even try to drive you out. Her voice hardened. You'll lose everything you've built here. Then we'll build somewhere else, Caleb said simply. She blinked, surprised. You think I'm marrying you just to leave you on your own? That defeats the whole purpose. Despite everything, Caleb almost smiled. That defeats the whole purpose. Grace opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. I don't understand you. That makes 2 of us, Caleb admitted. But we've got the rest of our lives to figure it out. The sound of horses approaching cut off whatever she might have said next. Caleb turned to see Grant riding toward them alone, his weathered face unreadable in the afternoon light. The old man dismounted slowly, his eyes moving between Caleb and Nal Nish, reading the space between them like tracks in dirt. You have made your choice, Grant said, not a question. I have, Caleb confirmed. Grant nodded once, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in leather. Then we must do this now, before the settlers come, before my warriors return. He looked at his daughter, and for the first time, Caleb saw genuine pain in the old man's eyes. I am sorry it had to be this way. Nalish's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Grant unwrapped the bundle, revealing what looked like ceremonial items. Nothing elaborate, just simple objects that carried the weight of tradition. A binding requires a witness and an exchange of promises. Grant said, I will serve as witness. The promises you must make yourselves. Caleb looked at Grace, at this woman he barely knew, who he was about to bind himself to for life. She looked back at him with eyes that held a question she couldn't quite voice. And somewhere in the distance, growing closer, Caleb heard the sound of many horses. Time had run out. The approaching horses grew louder, at least a dozen riders, maybe more. Grant heard them, too. His face remained calm, but his movements became more urgent as he arranged the ceremonial items on a flat rock. "We don't have time for the full ritual," Grant said. "We'll do the binding. That's all that matters legally and spiritually." Caleb glanced toward the sound of hoofbeats. "How long?" 5 minutes, maybe less." Grant positioned himself so he could see both the path and his daughter stand facing each other. Caleb and Nal Nish moved to comply. She stood a full head taller than him, forcing Caleb to tilt his chin up to maintain eye contact. In any other circumstance, the height difference would have been comical. Now it just felt surreal. "In my culture," Grant began, speaking quickly, "marriage is about protection and partnership, not love, not romance. Those may come later or they may not. What matters is a commitment to stand together against the world." He looked at Caleb. "Do you understand this?" "I do." Grant turned to his daughter. "Grace, this man offers you his name, his home, and his protection. Do you accept?" She hesitated, her eyes searching Caleb's face as if trying to find the lie, the trick, the inevitable betrayal. She'd been hurt too many times to trust easily. The horses were close enough now that Caleb could hear individual voices, shouting to each other. "We're running out of time," Grant said softly. Nalish took a breath. "I accept." "Caleb Tyler," Grant continued. "This woman offers you her loyalty, her labor, and her presence in your life until death. Do you accept?" The phrasing was deliberately transactional, stripping away any pretense of romance. This was a contract, not a love story. Caleb appreciated the honesty. "I accept." Grant picked up a length of woven cord from the ceremonial items. "Among my people, we bind the hands to symbolize the binding of lives. But we don't have time for that." Instead, he took Caleb's right hand and placed it against Nish's left palm. Her hand was massive compared to his, scarred and calloused from years of isolation and hard living, but her grip, when she closed her fingers around his, was surprisingly gentle. "In the eyes of the spirits, in the eyes of the earth, in the eyes of those who witness," Grant said, his voice carrying ritual weight despite the rushed circumstances, "you are now bound. What was two is now one. This cannot be undone." He wrapped the cord around their joined hands once, symbolic rather than functional, then removed it. "It's done," Grant said. "She is now your responsibility, your burden, your family." The word should have felt heavy, oppressive. Instead, Caleb felt something unexpected, relief, like he'd finally made a decision that mattered after years of making none at all. Nish pulled her hand back slowly, staring at her palm as if expecting to see some visible change. When she looked up at Caleb, her expression was unreadable. The riders burst into view, not Apache warriors this time, but settlers, rough men from the homesteads, led by a thick-necked farmer Caleb recognized from the trading post. They carried rifles, pitchforks, improvised weapons. Behind them, looking pale and frightened, was a woman whose son Nalish had saved. "There!" Someone shouted, pointing at Grace. That's the one Natalie described. The mob pulled their horses to a stop, forming a loose semicircle around Caleb's property. The farmer who led them raised his rifle, not quite pointing it at anyone yet, but the threat was clear. "Tyler," he called out, "step away from that thing. We're here to handle this before someone gets hurt." Grant moved to stand beside his daughter, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. The old man looked small next to Grace, but his presence carried an authority that made several of the settlers shift nervously. Caleb stepped forward, positioning himself between the mob and his... He stumbled mentally over the word. His wife. "You're on my land," Caleb said, his voice carrying across the distance, "and you're threatening my family." The word family hung in the air like a gunshot. Several settlers exchanged confused glances. "Your family?" The farmer's face twisted with disgust. "That's no family. That's a monster." Natalie said it lifted a wagon like it was nothing. "That ain't natural. That ain't human. That woman saved Natalie's son from dying." Caleb shot back. "Where's the monster in that?" "Don't matter what it did," another settler yelled. "It shouldn't exist. The Apache know it. That's why they tried to burn it." The logic was circular and vicious, fed by fear and the human need to destroy what they didn't understand. Caleb had seen this before in different contexts, different targets. The pattern was always the same. "Her name is Nal Nish," Caleb said, emphasizing the word her, "and as of 5 minutes ago, she's my wife." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the horses seemed to sense the shock rippling through the crowd. "You married it?" The farmer's voice rose in disbelief. Are you insane? You brought a curse onto your own head. I made a choice, Caleb replied. The same choice I'm making now. You want to hurt my wife? You go through me first. The farmer's face flushed red. He raised his rifle fully now, pointing it directly at Caleb's chest. Then maybe we go through you. Grant's hand tightened on his knife. Grace took a step forward, placing herself partially in front of Caleb, protecting him despite being the one everyone wanted dead. The tension stretched like wire about to snap. Then a new voice cut through the standoff, cold and authoritative. Lower your weapons now. Everyone turned to see a man on horseback approaching from the east. He wore a badge pinned to his vest. Territorial marshal, the kind of authority that transcended local feuds and mob justice. The marshal surveyed the scene with practiced eyes, taking the armed settlers, the Apache elder, the unusually tall woman, and Caleb standing between all of them. Someone want to explain, the marshal said slowly, why I just rode into what looks like a lynching? The marshal dismounted with the careful movements of a man who defused too many powder kegs to rush. He was older than Caleb expected, maybe 60, with gray threading through his dark beard and eyes that had seen every variation of human stupidity. Marshal Dillon. He introduced himself, though he didn't offer his hand. Someone want to start talking before I arrest all of you for disturbing the peace? The farmer with the rifle lowered it slightly, but his jaw remained set. This man harbors a dangerous creature, Marshal. We got a right to protect our families. That's so. Dillon's eyes moved to Grace, studying her without the fear or disgust the settler showed, just clinical assessment. You kill anyone, ma'am? Grace hesitated, then spoke clearly. One man 3 years ago. He came to kill me first. Self-defense, witnesses. Her father witnessed the aftermath. Caleb interjected. Grant here. He's a respected leader among the Apache. Dillon looked at Grant, who nodded once. The marshal seemed to consider this, then turned back to the settlers. Self-defense ain't murder. That's law, not opinion. He gestured at the mob. What I see here is a dozen armed men threatening a woman on private property. That's not protection. That's a crime. But she's not natural, another settler shouted. Look at her. Being tall isn't illegal, Dillon said flatly. Being different isn't illegal. Hell, being Apache isn't even illegal, though some of you act like it should be. His voice hardened. What is illegal is forming a lynch mob. So, unless someone can give me actual evidence of an actual crime, you boys are going home now. The farmer's face flushed red. You're just going to let this stand? Let Tyler keep that thing on his land? That thing, Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet, is my wife. Show some respect or get off my property. Several settlers actually flinched at the word, wife. Natalie, the woman whose son had been saved, looked like she might be sick. Marshal Dillon's eyebrows rose slightly. Your wife? That legal? Witnessed and binding? Grant confirmed. 5 minutes ago. Apache ceremony, but recognized by territorial law regarding indigenous marriages. Dillon nodded slowly. Then it settled. These folks are married. What they do on their own land is their business. He fixed the settlers with a hard stare. Anyone got a problem with that? You take it up with the judge, not with rifles and pitchforks. The mob shifted uncertainly, their righteous anger deflating under the weight of actual authority, without the fuel of mob mentality. They were just frightened neighbors who let fear override reason. This isn't over, the farmer muttered, but he was already turning his horse around. Yeah, it is, Dillon replied. And if I hear about anyone bothering the Tylers, I'll be back, and I won't be polite. The settlers dispersed slowly, shooting dark looks over their shoulders, but lacking the courage to defy a territorial marshal. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving only dust and the memory of how close everything had come to violence. Dillon watched them go, then turned to Caleb. You know what you've done? Made a choice, Caleb said. Made yourself an outcast, Dillon corrected. Those settlers won't forget. They won't forgive. You'll be welcome nowhere within 50 miles. Then we'll go somewhere else, Caleb retorted. The marshal studied him for a long moment, then surprised Caleb by almost smiling. Stubborn. Good. You'll need it. He looked at Grace. You got lucky finding this one, ma'am. Most men would have let the mob have you just to save their own skin. I know, Grace said quietly. Dillon mounted his horse, preparing to leave. Then he paused. There's territory opening up further west, past the mineral claims. Good land, plenty of water, far enough from settlements that folks won't bother you much. He adjusted his reins. Just a suggestion from someone who's seen too many good people destroyed by bad neighbors. With that, he rode off, leaving Caleb, Grace, and Grant alone in the settling dust. Grant approached his daughter, his weathered face showing emotions he kept carefully hidden until now. "I chose this man," he said, speaking to her in English so Caleb would understand. "Because 15 years ago he lost his wife and child to sickness. He knows grief. He knows isolation." The old man's voice roughened. "And because when I watched him from the ridge last night, I saw him pull you from that fire without hesitation, without fear, without calculating what it would cost him." Caleb stiffened. "You were watching? I needed to know what kind of man you were before I asked this of you," Grant explained. He looked between them. "Some men are brave only when it benefits them. You are brave even when it destroys you. That is the kind of man who could protect my daughter." He reached out and touched Naylor's scarred hand gently. "I failed you. Let them hurt you. Let them make you believe you were less than human." His voice broke slightly. "This is my way of making it right. Giving you to someone who will see you as I should have, as worthy of protection, of life, of dignity." Naylor's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she squeezed her father's hand once, a gesture that said more than words could. Grant mounted his horse. "I will not see you again. It would endanger you both if I did. But know this, you are no longer alone, either of you." He rode away without looking back, leaving Caleb and Gray standing in front of the ranch house as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. They were married. They were outcasts. They were bound together by impossible circumstances and a ceremony performed under threat of death. And somehow, against all logic, Caleb felt more free than he had in 15 years. The house felt different with another person inside. Caleb had lived alone for so long that even the sound of someone else breathing in the next room seemed foreign. He stood at the window, watching the last light fade from the sky, aware of Nish sitting at his table behind him. She hadn't spoken since they'd come inside, just sat there, hands folded in her lap, waiting for something. Instructions, maybe, or rejection once the reality of what he'd agreed to fully sank in. "We should leave," Caleb said, breaking the silence. "Head west like the marshal suggested. Start fresh somewhere people don't know our story." Her voice was steady, practical. 3 days enough time to pack what matters, sell what doesn't. He turned to face her. "I'm not sentimental about this place. It was just somewhere to hide." Nish looked around the sparse room. Simple furniture, bare walls, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here, just existed. 15 years in one place, and you call hiding?" she asked. "What would you call it?" She considered the question carefully. Waiting, maybe, for something worth coming back to life for? The observation was too accurate, too close to truths Caleb had avoided examining. He told himself he chose solitude, that he preferred isolation, but really, he'd just been frozen in place, unable to move forward or back, stuck in a moment his family died. "What about you?" Caleb asked. "What were you doing in that cabin all those years?" "The same thing," Grace admitted. "Waiting to die, just taking longer than expected." They sat with that honesty for a moment. Two people who'd given up on living suddenly forced to figure out how to do it together. "I don't know how to be married," Caleb said finally, "especially like this. No courtship, no time to know each other, nothing but circumstances forcing us together. I don't know how to be anything except alone." Nish replied, "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to like me. Just don't regret this, not out loud, at least." The vulnerability in that request struck Caleb hard. She expected rejection, even from a man who'd married her to save her life. "Come here," he said. She rose slowly, uncertainty. She mirrored his every movement, traversing the room until she stood directly before him. This close, the disparity in their heights was even more striking. Caleb was forced to tilt his head back significantly to meet her gaze. "I'm going to tell you something," Caleb said, his voice firm, "and I need you to believe it because I won't repeat it." He locked his eyes on hers, conveying the weight of his words. "I don't regret this. Not the marriage, not the choice, none of it. What I regret is that the world made this necessary. That people treated you so badly that death looked preferable to living." Grace's throat constricted, and she swallowed hard, the emotion evident in her face. "You don't know me well enough to mean that." "I know enough," Caleb countered, his voice steady. "I know you'd rather die than accept help, but you helped me anyway when those warriors came. I know you lifted that wagon to save a child who'd never thank you. I know you survived years of treatment that would have broken most people." He reached out, gently taking her scarred hand in his. "That's enough to know you're worth protecting." For the first time since they'd met, the carefully constructed facade of N.A.L. Nish began to crumble. Tears welled up in her eyes, not born of simple sadness, but from something far deeper. Perhaps it was relief, or maybe the long-awaited recognition that someone finally saw her, truly saw her, as a human being deserving of compassion. "I'll try not to be a burden," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You'll fail," Caleb stated bluntly, his honesty unwavering. "Because everyone's a burden sometimes. That's what marriage is. Agreeing to carry each other when needed." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, a silent promise of support. "But I'll try not to be one either, and we'll both fail at that, too. And we'll figure it out anyway." The faintest hint of a smile flickered across her lips, a fragile expression of hope. "That's a terrible foundation for a marriage." "Better than most get," Caleb replied, his voice laced with a touch of wry humor. In the days that followed, they busied themselves with preparations for their departure. Caleb sold his livestock to a neighboring rancher, a man more concerned with acquiring the animals than with questioning Caleb's motives. They packed only the essentials, tools, supplies, and a few personal belongings, all carefully distributed between 2 horses. The land itself, Caleb simply relinquished, walking away without a backward glance. It wasn't worth the effort of selling, and anyone who wanted it could simply take it. On the morning of their departure, Grace paused outside the ranch house, her gaze lingering on the place that had been her husband's home for the past 15 years. "Any regrets?" she asked, her voice soft. Caleb tightened the straps on his horse's saddle, his movements deliberate. "Only that I didn't leave sooner." Together, they rode west as the sun climbed higher in the sky. 2 outcasts, bound together by circumstance, ventured into the unknown, seeking a place where, just maybe, they could build something resembling a life. Their journey was mostly silent, but the quiet wasn't awkward or strained. It was the comfortable silence of 2 people who understood that words weren't always necessary, that some things could be communicated without speaking. About a week into their travels, they stumbled upon the land the marshal had mentioned. It was a valley blessed with a good water source, sheltered from the harsh winds that swept across the plains, and situated far enough from established settlements to discourage unwanted attention. Together, they built a small cabin, their shared labor a testament to their growing partnership. Nish's strength and unwavering determination made the work go faster than Caleb could have ever managed on his own. Months turned into seasons, and then into a year. The neighbors they eventually encountered were few and far between, and they mostly kept to themselves, a trait that suited both Caleb and Nish just fine. Nish slowly began to realize that not everyone saw her as a monster, that not everyone was driven by fear and prejudice. And Caleb learned that the self-imposed isolation he had embraced for so long had never truly been the freedom he had convinced himself it was. They never spoke of love, never uttered the words of affection that often define relationships. That wasn't part of their agreement, wasn't what had brought them together. But they built something arguably more valuable, something that ran deeper than fleeting emotions. They forged a partnership built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and a profound knowledge that neither of them had to face the world alone anymore. Caleb had saved her from a literal, fiery death. She, in turn, had saved him from a different kind of burning, the slow, agonizing consumption of a life lived without purpose or meaning. The impossible request had ultimately led them to an impossible life. But sometimes, Caleb mused as he watched Nish tending their garden on a crisp spring morning, maybe the impossible was exactly what both of them had needed all along. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and choices reshape destinies in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.